My name is Emily. I'm 27. And for most of my life I was the quiet instrument in a loud family band. I didn't squeal. I didn't demand. I didn't break rhythm. I just kept time while everyone else grabbed the mic. My little sister Sophie is 2 years younger. She learned to kick ball change before she learned long division. If a spotlight existed in any room, she found it like a sunflower finds the sun. Mom called her a natural. Dad called her our star. They called me steady. Steady, like a metronome you forget is even there. It wasn't the praise that bothered me. It was the economy of it. How applause was always scarce when it was my turn. Sophie's recitals were confetti and cupcakes. My piano juries were a quick, good job, kiddo, over the sink. When I wrote my first string quartet in high school, I left the pages on the dining table. They sat there under a bowl of oranges until the corners curled. Sophie's choreography board lived on the fridge like a shrine. I learned to stop asking for space. I learned to tuck my sheet music into the pockets of silence. I chose composition in college because I loved building worlds you could hear. Sophie chose performance because she loved being the world you watched. Family weekends revolved around her showcases. My premieres were maybe next time, if a rehearsal didn't run long. I told myself it didn't matter. That being overlooked was a form of freedom. That quiet meant fewer arguments and more time to make art. But invisibility has a drip. It isn't loud. It just leaks into everything until even your wins feel damp. After college I moved to a walk-up in Chicago with a piano that hated humidity. I scored tiny films. I worked coffee shifts. I whispered to my rent, give me 1 more month. I said yes to indie game teams with ambition and no budgets. I learned the sound of an inbox that pings at 2 a.m. Sophie moved to L. and racked followers by the 1,000. She posted sunrise stretches on rooftops. She posted fresh nails and fresh scripts. She posted men in unbuttoned shirts who held dogs like accessories. Mom reposted every single one. Dad learned how to use clapping emojis. When I dropped an EP of piano miniatures, I sent the link in the family chat. Mom replied with a heart an hour later. Dad typed, proud of you, Em, have you seen Sophie's new reel? Sophie sent a string of star emojis and a selfie in a mirror that probably cost more than my keyboard. I muted the chat for a week and told myself it was for focus. Then the email came. It had the gilded tone of a door you never thought you'd touch swinging open. Emily Hart, selected for the National Emerging Composers Showcase. My throat did that tight painful thing it does when a big wish finally lands. I read it once. Twice. A third time just to hear the sentence out loud in my head. They wanted my work. They wanted my name on a program other people actually read. There would be cameras. There would be interviews. There would be a broadcast with my name captioned correctly for once. I stood up, sat down, stood up again, and cried into a dish towel. Then I texted the family group. Showcase in 3 weeks, I wrote. New York. Live broadcast. It would mean a lot if you came. The typing bubble appeared almost immediately. It was Sophie. OMG, that's the same weekend as the Lumiere Gala, she wrote. My agent got me tickets. Red carpet, M. Once in a lifetime. Mom chimed in like a publicist on a deadline. Don't guilt us, sweetheart, she typed. Sophie's had this on her vision board all year. Dad added the benediction that still had the power to bruise. She deserves it, he wrote. The word deserved blistered in my chest. I deleted 3 different replies that began with, I have deserved, and ended with nothing good. I typed 2 words instead. All right. I didn't mean what they thought I meant. I didn't mean, I accept my seat in the back row again. I meant, the show goes on without you. The next morning I woke before my alarm. I made black coffee and listened to the refrigerator hum in E-flat. I wrote. I tore pages. I wrote again. I walked the lakefront and scored the wind. I said my piece into the mirror. Your work is not a favor. Your work is not a hobby. Your work is your name. My phone buzzed with Sophie's feed. A behind-the-scenes dress fitting. A caption, dreams look better in sequins. Mom replied with 20 stars. Dad with 3 rockets. I put the phone face down and wrote a melody that didn't ask permission. A week later the showcase producer called. Her voice had the calm of someone who juggles 10 crises before breakfast. We're featuring you in a pre-roll piece, she said. Home footage, influences, the why behind the notes. Can you send childhood clips? I laughed softly. Most of my home movies are panning shots of Sophie. Then send the audio that made you, she said. Send the sounds. I recorded the creak of my apartment stairs. The rush of the L. The hush before a cue lands. I sent the voice memo of my grandmother teaching me to find middle C. I sent the voicemail Dad left the night I moved away, the one where he didn't say he loved me but told me to remember oil changes. I layered them under a theme that was mine. While the city deafened and blessed me, I collected quiet proof that I had always existed. 2 nights before the flight, I went home for dinner because routine is a hard habit to break. Sophie was there radiant and restless. Mom's kitchen smelled like basil and good intentions. Dad set 4 plates like the census still listed us as a unit. Sophie showed us gowns on her phone with reverence. This one says effortless, she said. This one says serious. This one says, who is she? Mom sighed in a way that translated to money will materialize. Dad asked about parking logistics for a gala he'd never been invited to. I cleared my throat and said, my rehearsal is Friday. No one looked up. I tried again. Downbeat at 10. Mom blinked. Oh honey, she said. Text us a clip. We'll watch it between events. Sophie reached for my hand like a consolation prize. We'll celebrate you after, she said with a smile that assumed the after included her. I squeezed back because reflex is powerful. I drove home listening to my own demo sweet like it was news from a kinder planet. The flight to New York took 2 hours and 16 years. I pressed my forehead to the window and counted the tiny grids below. At the venue, the stage crew threaded cables with choreography better than TV. A violist in cracked boots nodded at me like we were already a team. The conductor shook my hand and said my last name right. I wanted to sit down and cry from that alone. We rehearsed. The brass joked in 17 keys. The strings tuned the air into glass. My piece began and the room tilted into it as if the floor had remembered me. At bar 30 I heard an imperfection bloom into something honest. At bar 64 I let it live. At bar 92 I knew the ending could hold. We ran it again. It held. At lunch I stepped into the alley and called home because I still believed ritual could be a bridge. Mom answered on speaker over the sound of curling irons. Can't talk long, she said. They moved Sophie's call time. Send photos, Dad yelled from another room. Make us proud. The line crackled with hairspray and excitement that wasn't mine. I will, I said, simple as a whole note. That night I lay in the hotel bed listening to a radiator speak in triplets. I opened the family chat and stared at our thread like it was an X-ray. Sophie had posted a boomerang of champagne bubbles. Mom had layered text over it, manifesting magical nights. Dad had added 3 thumbs up like punctuation. I typed, showtime tomorrow. No one replied. At 8:04 a.m. The showcase producer texted. Quick note, she wrote. National pickup confirmed. Segment expanded. You'll open Act 2. I sat up too fast and the room went sideways. Copy, I typed, pretending this happens all the time. I made tea and watched sunlight climb the wallpaper like forgiveness. The hall filled by evening with the dress of people who are used to choosing their seats. Backstage smelled like dust, perfume, and electricity. I stood alone with my score and felt a steady thing rise in me. Not anger. Not hunger. Certainty. The curtain rose for the first half. Names I had studied in school walked by and nodded like colleagues. At intermission I refreshed the family chat even though I promised myself I wouldn't. Sophie had posted her red carpet look. Mom had written, she did that. Dad had typed, deserved. I put my phone in airplane mode because I needed the sky more than the ground. A stagehand whispered I woke up weeks after the award ceremony feeling different. It wasn't overnight, but something inside me had shifted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't desperate for my parents' approval. I wasn't waiting for Marcus to stop being the golden child. I wasn't begging to be noticed. I was building a life that didn't need them at the center. The award opened doors I didn't even know existed. People who once ignored me suddenly wanted to collaborate. Mentors I had admired for years started calling me directly. Emails filled my inbox from companies, podcasts, and conferences. At first, it felt surreal. I almost caught myself wanting to text my parents about it. But then I'd remember the silence after the ceremony. I'd remember Marcus' selfies at a concert and my mom's heart emojis. So instead, I poured that energy into myself. I worked harder, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like momentum. I moved into a better apartment, one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. Every morning I'd stand there, coffee in hand, telling myself, this is mine. I did this. I changed how I dressed. Not to impress anyone, but because I finally saw myself differently. Sharper suits. Shoes that clicked with confidence on the pavement. People noticed. Strangers at events would drift toward me. Colleagues asked for my opinion in meetings. And slowly, the voice in my head that used to whisper, "You're invisible," started to fade. Meanwhile, my family kept spinning in the same orbit. Marcus posted photos of soccer games and nights out. Mom cheered him on like he'd won the Super Bowl. Dad sent, "proud of you," texts to Marcus over things as small as fixing his car. I said less and less in the family group chat. When Mom asked if I could help Marcus with money again, I just typed, "No." I didn't explain. I didn't apologize. For the first time, I let silence do the talking. And it felt powerful. But success has a way of multiplying when you stop holding yourself back. Within a year, I wasn't just respected in my field. I was becoming a name people recognized. Articles were written about my work. I got invited to speak on panels alongside people I once studied in textbooks. It was strange and exhilarating at the same time. Yet, in the quiet moments, I still thought about my family. Not with longing anymore, but with curiosity. Would they ever wake up and realize what they had missed? Or would Marcus always be their entire world? I stopped trying to answer that. I stopped trying to fix it. Instead, I focused on the platform I was being given. One day, during a meeting with a media executive, he said something that stuck with me. "Leo, people don't just respect your work. They connect with your story. Have you thought about sharing more of it?" At first, I resisted. My story felt too personal, too raw. But then I thought about the nights I'd spent invisible. The times I wanted someone to say, "I see you." Maybe if I spoke, others would feel less alone. So I started small. A podcast interview here. A magazine article there. I talked about resilience. About being underestimated. About finding strength in silence. I never named my family, but the truth was clear in every word. And people responded. Emails poured in from strangers. I felt invisible, too. You gave me hope. I thought I was the only one. It was overwhelming. And healing. For the first time, my pain felt like it had purpose. Meanwhile, my parents stayed oblivious. Dad still asked if I was at that same job. Mom complained that I didn't visit enough. Marcus joked about me being boring. They had no idea who I had become. And honestly, I liked it that way. Their blindness was my freedom. Then came the invitation that changed everything. A letter embossed in gold arrived at my apartment. It was from the National Leadership Gala. Not only was I invited, but I was to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award for my work. At 27. It sounded absurd, but it was real. And it would be broadcast live across the entire country. When I read the words, I laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, but because fate has a twisted sense of humor. The boy who had been stuffed into a drawer at home was about to be put on millions of screens. The organizers called me in for planning sessions. One of them leaned forward and said, "We'd like to feature your story on national TV. Not just your work. Your journey." My chest tightened. For a moment, I pictured my parents' living room. The TV flickering. Them sitting on the couch expecting a normal night. And then my face filling the screen. The son they ignored telling his truth to an entire nation. I said yes. Inside, I knew this was it. This was the moment they couldn't brush off. The night of the gala felt unreal. The venue was glittering with lights and velvet. Reporters lined the red carpet. Cameras flashed like fireworks. As I walked past the microphones, I felt calm. Not nervous, not scared. Calm. Because I wasn't doing this to prove myself anymore. I was doing it to live in my own light. When they finally called my name, I stepped onto the stage. The award was heavy in my hands, gleaming under the spotlights. I leaned into the microphone. And for the first time, I told my story out loud. I spoke about being overlooked. About what it felt like to be invisible. About how silence can break you, but it can also build you. I told the audience, invisibility can be a powerful teacher. It forces you to grow roots when no one is watching. And when the light finally finds you, you're ready. The hall went silent. Then the applause erupted like thunder. I looked out at the sea of faces, strangers clapping for me. But in my mind, I saw something else. A living room. A TV screen. My parents frozen in shock. Marcus rolling his eyes, but hearing every word. That night wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making them small. It was about finally letting myself be big. After the speech, my phone exploded with messages. Colleagues. Mentors. Strangers. All saying my words had moved them. But the family chat stayed quiet. Hours later, the silence broke. Mom finally texted. "Leo, why didn't you tell us it was such a big event?" Not, "We're proud of you." Not, "We're sorry we missed it." Just blame. Then Dad wrote, "You made us sound like bad parents on live TV. Do you know what people will think?" I laughed out loud in my hotel room. Even now, their worry was about appearances. Then Marcus chimed in. "Bro, a little dramatic, don't you think? Chill." And that was it. The last straw. The moment I knew they would never change. I didn't reply. Not with anger. Not with begging. Just silence. Because silence was finally mine to control. The days after the gala felt unreal. Everywhere I went, people recognized me. Not as Marcus' older brother. Not as the quiet kid who blended into the wallpaper. But as myself. Leo Harrison. It should have felt perfect. And in many ways, it did. But something inside me still ached. The applause faded when I got home at night. The lights went dark, and I was left alone in my apartment. Staring at the trophy on my shelf. It was beautiful. It was everything I thought I wanted. But it didn't erase the hollow ache where family should have been. For days, I avoided the family group chat. Their last messages still burned in my head. Mom blaming me. Dad worrying about appearances. Marcus telling me to chill. I told myself I didn't care. But deep down, I did. Not because I needed them anymore. But because carrying that bitterness was exhausting. And I realized I didn't want to live my life angry. I wanted peace. So one evening, I did something unexpected. I called my mom. She answered on the second ring, her voice hesitant. Leo? Yes, Mom. It's me. Silence hung between us for a moment. Then she sighed. Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you give us a chance to be there? I almost snapped back. I almost listed every time they hadn't shown up before. But instead, I said quietly, because you've had chances my whole life. And you chose not to be there. Her breath caught. I could hear the hurt in her silence. But I didn't stop. Mom, I'm not calling to fight. I'm calling because I need you to understand something. That night wasn't about shaming you. It was about freeing myself. She whispered, we didn't realize how much we hurt you. And for the first time, I believed her. Not because it excused everything. But because denial had always been easier for them than facing the truth. We talked for over an hour. There were tears. There were apologies. And there were long pauses where neither of us knew what to say. But it was a start. The next day, my dad called. His voice was stiff, formal at first. But eventually it cracked. Son, I didn't know how invisible you felt. I thought being hard on you made you stronger. I closed my eyes, remembering every time he'd brushed me off. And yet, hearing his voice waver, I realized he wasn't the monster I'd built in my head. He was just flawed. Deeply flawed. Dad, I said, I don't need excuses. I just need honesty. And maybe, change. He exhaled. I'll try. For my father, that was more than I had ever expected. The hardest call came last. Marcus. He picked up with his usual swagger. Yo, celebrity bro. Guess I should get your autograph now. I almost hung up. But then I thought about all the years I had swallowed my words. And I decided I wouldn't do that anymore. Marcus, listen, I said firmly. This isn't a joke. You've always been the star. And I let you have that. But you don't get to laugh at my pain anymore. He was quiet. Shockingly quiet. Then he muttered, I didn't know it was that deep. It was, I said. And whether you admit it or not, you benefited from me being invisible. There was another long silence. Then, for the first time, Marcus said something I never expected. I'm sorry, man. I was a kid. I didn't think about it. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't enough to erase everything. But it was something. And in that moment, I chose to take it. Not for him. For me. Because forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about letting them off the hook. It was about letting myself move forward without the weight of anger. Weeks passed. Slowly, conversations with my family started to feel different. Mom asked about my projects without changing the subject to Marcus. Dad told me he'd watched my speech again and admitted he cried. Marcus even showed up at one of my events, standing quietly in the back, clapping when no one expected him to. It wasn't a miracle transformation. They were still themselves. Messy. Imperfect. But for the first time, they were trying. And that mattered more than I expected. One night, I hosted them at my apartment. We had dinner together for the first time in years. There were awkward moments. Old habits still showed. But there was also laughter. Real laughter. And as I looked around the table, I realized something. I didn't need them to fix the past. I didn't need them to become the perfect family. All I needed was peace. And I had finally found it. The trophies on my shelf gleamed under the city lights. But the real victory wasn't in the awards. It was in my heart. I had spent years chasing validation. Now, I had chosen forgiveness instead. And that was the greatest achievement of all.